Just the climate of massive recourse to terrorism is something that we also see in the pre-1914 and then 1914 time, right before World War I. And I just wanted to evoke this a little bit, right? As you know, what I'm trying to argue, and I think I'm not exactly alone, but this is not the dominant mainstream quackademic point of view. What I'm arguing is that you have these Freemasonic networks that are generally assembled by or loyal to or inspired by King Edward VII of Great Britain, who was the head of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. So we're talking about the Scottish Rite, we're talking the York Rite, too, of the British, and then the Grand Orient of France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and the Middle East, other Freemasonic groups, and then the Russian Okhrana, right, the Tsarist secret police. And that's essentially the substructure, right? What you see going into action in 1914 is something like this. And when people are aware of Sarajevo, right, that World War I somehow has something to do with this double assassination in Bosnia of the heir to the Austrian throne. Just wanted to go through, though, the pattern of assassinations and similar events. Sometimes it's not quite an assassination. It can be somebody gets wounded, an attempted assassination, and sometimes it's a character assassination. Right? It's the discrediting committee goes into office. Now, here's a fairly standard book, Europe's Last Summer by David Fromkin. Fromkin wrote that book, A Peace to End All Peace. It's not the worst. It's no analysis, but it has some interesting facts. And one of the things he has is a list of the prevalence of terrorism in probably the 2 decades before World War I. So he makes a list of who all had gotten killed. And generally killed by anarchists, right? That's the cover story. And it's usually Italian anarchists, sometimes Russian anarchists, but anarchists, right? And the idea, of course, is that these are not just anarchists, but that they're steered by these Freemasonic networks, right? A lot of times these are, very, duped people who don't know what they're doing, but somebody else does. Sure. So here's who got killed. The president of France, Sadi Carnot, was assassinated in 1894. The Shah of Persia was assassinated in 1896. In that same year, it was the president of Uruguay getting killed, the prime minister of Spain in 1897, the president of Guatemala in 1898, and also the Empress of Austria in 1898. The president of the Dominican Republic in the following year of 1899, the King of Italy, Umberto, killed in 1900, President McKinley of the United States in 1901, the King and Queen of Serbia in 1903. That's interesting for us because that's carried out by the same guy who did Sarajevo, right? Colonel Apis Dimitrievich at the lowest level. Prime Minister of Greece, assassinated 1905. Prime Minister of Bulgaria, 1907. Prime Minister of Persia, Iran again, 1907. 1907, a big year. King of Portugal, 1908. Prime Minister of Egypt, 1910. Prime Minister of Russia, Stolypin, the last reformer, 1911. Prime Minister of Spain, 1912. President of Mexico, 1913. King of Greece, 1913. How about that? That's, so you can see that there's a network that's acting. Now, I haven't had time to go through and analyze each one of these cases, but what I can do is look at 1914 for a second. And again, jumping ahead to what I want you to start thinking about is start looking for terrorist actions. Any politician who happens to get killed, say, in the next couple of weeks and months, you have to entertain the hypothesis that this is somebody in Europe, say, who does not want war, who does not want the confrontation with Russia.
I think you're right.
And
I
has
think
some idea, okay?
Yeah, they're going to weed those people out.
Here's what we have in 1914, right? We've talked, I think, before about what happened Sarajevo, 28th of June, 1914. I just remind you that there were, as I think I did 2 months ago on your show, there were people in London waiting for the news, right? They kept saying, got any news from Sarajevo? Anything come in from Bosnia? We're waiting for big things. Have you seen the wires? And then if not, they'd be disappointed. There were also, according to some wartime reports I found from Austria, there were people in St. Petersburg, Russia, who were waiting for Franz Ferdinand and or his wife to get killed in the days leading up to June 28th, 1914. Right? And that's perfectly possible because they were on a kind of a tour of the province. Right? They could have been assassinated. Right? They were actually in Sarajevo a day or two before they got killed, and they sort of came in incommunicado for shopping, right, on a non-official.
Even back then, the network of people who had inside information, the whispers, the confidentiality shared, that people knew these things don't happen randomly, never.
And of course, the likely suspect is the Russian Okhrana, right? That you've got this thing called the Black Hand, Unity or Death. This is Colonel Apis and company. You have the Black Hand, which is an extremist terrorist group. It exists within other sort of more blurred kinds of formations, but these real hardliners are from the Black Hand, Colonel Apis, and that's sort of a satellite of the Russian Okhrana, and the connections go through the Russian embassy. So in many ways, if you're an Austrian, you could look at that and say, well, the Russians have been were a part of it. But now, here's the thing that I think people don't often hear, which I think I've assembled now up to a point. The other assassinations going on at the same time. And what you're going to find is that the people who tend to get killed in the summer of 1914 are people who are either against any war or they want their countries to be on the side of Germany and Austria, not Britain, France, and Russia. And the first one, I guess we can do this after the break, the commander of the entire Italian armed forces died 2 to 2.5 days after Sarajevo, most likely poisoned, and this is worth telling.
Coincidental stuff again, eh? All right, yes, those strange deaths, political deaths. Be right back with Webster in a minute. Hold on. Okay, let's get right back to our conversation with Webster Griffin Tarpley. Always fascinating. Go ahead.
So the terror wave of the summer of 1914, right? A whole series of strange deaths. Some of them obviously violent, and then some of them camouflaged, disguised. And the one I think a very important one is the chief of staff, the military commander of the entire Italian army, General Alberto Pollio, Pollio. This is almost unknown here in the U.S., but he was the commander. He was at the same level as Moltke of Germany or Joffre of France or Hertzendorf, Konrad von Hertzendorf of Austria or Pershing, I guess, of the U.S., right? This is a top military guy. And he died on essentially between the night of June 30th and the morning of July 1st, 1914. And here's the problem. This guy was strongly in favor of Italy staying in the Triple Alliance, right? Staying with Germany and Austria and fighting against France and Russia and the British. And this is extremely important. This has something to do with the Battle of the Marne, which of course is the big battle, right? The biggest battle of human history up to that point was the First Battle of the Marne, and the anniversary for that is essentially next week. It starts about the 7th or the 8th of September and goes on for several days, depending on how you want to count it. You just have to remember, according to the basic Schlieffen Plan, the German military plan for dealing with France and then turning on Russia, Italy was going to contribute 12, count them, 12 divisions to the German attack on France. And these were, it means 4 Army Corps of 3 divisions each, right? This is a great deal.
Yeah.
They were going to go across northern Italy to Verona, up the Brenner, right, across the Alps, through then across southern Germany, and they were going to hold the Upper Rhine. In other words, from Switzerland, for 40 or 50 miles, that was all going to be taken over by the Italians, and they were going to be on the defensive. But this would have meant an additional German army at Paris, in the critical time of early September 1914 that could have made, and I obviously would have made, I think, the difference between success and failure. So what happened to Pollio? Before we even get to Pollio, you have to remember, Italy was a firm founding member of this Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And how come it wavered, and how come it eventually fell under the spell of Mussolini and then joined on the side of the Allies, right, in 1915? It helps if you've read A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway, right? Think about that stuff on the Italian front. The poor Italians trying to, attack up mountains, right?
Sure.
Really impossible stuff.
Yeah.
And then Caporetto, that's all in that movie, right? Take a look at it sometime, right, with Rock Hudson and everything. But anyway, here's the story. Italy was actually a founding member of the Triple Alliance, and they had King Humbert. King Humbert I was the founder of the Italian-Austrian part of that alliance, because he was he had many reasons for preferring Austria to France. Right, the Italians were very upset that the French had taken Tunisia, because the Italians thought they had some title to that, but the French said, "No, go to hell," and we're not going to give you anything. So at that point, Italy began gravitating towards Austria. In this King Umberto, there were 3 assassination attempts. There was one in Naples in 1878. There was another one in Rome in 1897. And then finally, the one that succeeded was in Monza, near Milan. It's where they have the Grand Prix, right? The racetrack
Monza.
for auto.
Yeah.
Monza. And that's 1900. So the king who would have been in favor of staying with Germany at all costs is dead, and instead we have Victor Emmanuel III, who is the king who's going to bring in Mussolini right after the war. So this guy is a Freemason. And of course, it's always interesting to remember that so many of these politicians were Freemasons, including Mussolini, including the guy who brought Italy into the war on the side of the British and French. He was a top Freemason. But of course, once he got into power, he knew how dangerous Freemasons were, and he tried to wipe them out, and he succeeded to a significant degree. So by the time 1914 rolls around, the king is this pro-British Freemason, Vittorio Emanuele III, no good. But you've still got the chief of staff, right, the top general, Pollio, is in favor of fulfilling the treaty obligations and sending the 12 divisions to go and help Germany, right, against the French. So what happens to him is he's in a hotel in Turin, Italy, right up in the northwest part of the country, right? You see the Alps all around.
Sure.
And he's in the Turin Palace Hotel. He has been out viewing some military exercises, starts feeling bad during the exercises, bring him back to the hotel. He's only got one assistant and bodyguard with him. This seems bad, although he's somebody who's got the habit of only telling people where he's going at the very last minute. He has some idea, I think, that he's in danger. So anyway, he ends up in this hotel. The hotel is a nest of the French intelligence service. And the hypothesis is the French intelligence service kills him. And the way they do it is with the help of the house physician, who administers some kind of opium and morphine injection. And then this famous waitress or maid, right? The maid, she's somebody who gets hired the day before. She works one day, the day the guy dies, and then she's gone, and she's never heard of again as long as anybody lives. So we had the maid for a day in the room of this top general, and of course he's dead then, right? He dies. Once he's dead, they bring in General Cadorna, who is the pro-British, pro-French butcher. He's the guy who gets everybody killed that you see in that movie, Farewell to Arms, right? Trying to attack up the sides of mountains and things like this. I mean, things
very
that only
smart.
a lunatic could see.
Without air,
so
without
there's
air
Italy.
cover.
Now, this is a very, very big deal. There's also a fleet that gives the British and the French quite a bit of pause, right? But the main thing is these 12 divisions that would have been, a tremendous thing for the Germans to have. And again, my approach to this thing is the only merciful outcome of this by the time it got to 1914 was for it to be over as soon as possible, to be over, finished, done. And who wins is of less importance than get it over with, right? And probably the Germans are the only ones who could do it quickly. So they tend to, the hypotheses in this direction tend to center on them. How about this one? Russia, okay? In Russia, the important thing is get Russia into the war at all costs, right? That's what the British want, right? They've got to have Russia, and the French see it the same way. The French Freemasons. So the problem here, believe it or not, is Rasputin, right? The crazy monk, except maybe he's not so crazy. He's the one guy who's telling the Tsar in 1914 in July, he's telling him, make peace. Here's a little quote from Rasputin. He writes to the Tsar, or by means of a go-between, let Papa Nicholas not plan war, writes Rasputin, meaning the Tsar, right? Tsar Nicholas II. Let Papa Nicholas not plan war, for with war will come the end of Russia and yourselves, the Romanov dynasty, and you will lose to the last man.
Wow.
Now, this is good advice. This is the best advice that the Tsar got. But here's the interesting thing. In early July, right, less than 2 weeks after Sarajevo, and about 10 days after the death of the Italian Supreme Commander, old Rasputin is out there in the boondocks, and this woman comes up to him. Her name is Fiona Gusieva, and she's got a butcher knife, and she stabs him in the stomach. And this is the most serious assassination attempt before the final one, where the British do succeed in killing him. He is hospitalized for 7 weeks. He almost died. And as I say, he was pushing pacifism, and they would stay out of this war. Don't join either side.
They must have operated on the guy to sew up the internal wounds.
Yeah, it's called laparotomy, opening up the body cavity and getting inside and fixing it up. So, according to Rasputin, the prime suspect is, well, there are two brothers, Ilyador Junkovsky, Dzhunkovsky, and Vladimir. Probably Vladimir is the more famous of the Junkovsky brothers, because Vladimir Junkovsky is nothing less than the head of the Okhrana. He's the, Alan Dulles, the head of the entire secret police, the J. Edgar Hoover, whatever you want to call him. And he's been the military governor of Moscow. So just at the moment when this hypnotic control that Rasputin had over the Tsarina, and the Tsarina, of course, domineering over the weak-willed, vacillating Tsar, this could have kept Russia out of the war, right? This would have been a great thing for Russia. But no, it had to be this way. Interesting, the writer people may have heard of, Maxim Gorky, right, was part of this assassination attempt on Rasputin. Very, very interesting. And, of course, the local district attorney declines to press charges. No trial. Now, let me just mention the last two. This is now France, right? You got to have, if you're from the British, you got to have the French in the war. The French Grand Orient agrees with you about this. So we have two people. I think we mentioned one of them. Jean Jaurès, right? Jaures.
Yeah.
He's a socialist leader, and he's the guy who says, well, we promised everybody that we were on the verge. If we're on the verge of a war, we will have a general strike. And he was organizing a general strike to stop the war. He was assassinated in Paris on 31st of July, 1914. They had a ceremony. Hollande went there a couple of weeks ago now. But the other one is also very interesting. This is Caillaux, Caillaux. This is the former prime minister. He is a socialist, as is Jaurès, right, from the Second International. Social Democrat. And Caillot is also somebody who is perfectly capable of saying, no war, right? We've had enough of this. This is going to be terrible. We don't want it. So what they've done with him is not to kill him, but to do the character assassination route. The Figaro, right? Le Figaro, the newspaper, main right-wing newspaper of France even today, right?
Yeah.
Published a series of letters which were allegedly Caillot's letters to his mistress. Oh, what a scandal. So he had to quit, right? He had to step down from all of his government posts and everything. Except that, and this, I don't know whether this is planned or not. I rather think not. At the height of these letters being published, Caillot's wife shows up at the Figaro and she says, may I speak to the editor-in-chief?
Yeah.
And they take her in there, and she pulls out a gun and kills the editor-in-chief. So this had the effect of focusing even more attention on this thing. But the problem, of course, was then that with Caillot's wife going on trial, right, facing
wild
the
times.
guillotine.
Wild times.
But notice the pattern, right? It's not like any warmongers are getting killed. It's not like any people who are talking peace or negotiated solutions. It's only the ones who are against any war, like Rasputin, and I think Jaurès in some ways would fill the bill on that, or people like Pollio, the Italian, who he wants to be with the Germans and the Austrians. So there's and of course Franz Ferdinand is hated by the British because the one possible way of calming the Balkans would have been to have this third leg of the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy, right? You have Vienna, you have Budapest, but you could then have some other, something for the Slavs, right? So you'd have the Germans, the Hungarians, the Slavs, and then it would calm down and take the wind out of the sails of Serbia. So that's the kind of climate. That's a summary that I don't think has been heard in many a year.
No, probably never.
Probably never. Right?
No, seriously. All right, thank you.
Some of it's original, but these guys have been known, but there's been a lot of original stuff, but not the pattern. The pattern I think you've heard tonight is new.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Okay.
Talk soon.
See you in a month.
Okay.
If all goes well.
Indeed. All right, Webster. Good night. Thanks.